Tomás, here's my first question for you, and it actually comes from something that you guys talk about on the Alembic website. And one of the things that you say to your clients and prospective clients is that you're going to unlock the hidden drivers of growth. Why and which drivers of growth have been hidden?
You know, one of the most funny things that occurs is often people are doing marketing by playbook. Feels like they get handed this listicle, right? And they're like checking off, did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? And at no point do they think about business operating models. At no point do they think about what it is. So I'll give an example that we talk about a lot. Just because you sell a lot of things do not mean those things are the highest gross margin things. There are certain things that companies can sell that actually lose money, right? Discounted, et cetera.
Right.
So if you do the biggest marketing campaign of all time, you can spike the amount of revenue coming in the door, but you can actually lose cash.
Of course. That's
a decelerator to growth.
Right.
The other thing that can happen is you have chain reactions of things, right? We tend to be very, fallacy of the last thing we heard, right? Marketing does that as well. What were the actual things in the past that actually caused it? You know, one of the more interesting things as we deal with this is the hidden drivers of growth are the things that are non-obvious. And there is so much data in the world nowadays that none of us can know all of it. It is impossible.
Well, I'm giving it a pretty good shot.
Well, kidding. You know, the theory of data, that can be known.
Right.
But let's say, can you tell me every single file that's seen on the computer right there?
I cannot.
Imagine that at corporate scale.
Right. So, you know, what I'm really interested in is what the phrase you just used, the non-obvious things. What are some of the non-obvious drivers of growth from your perspective?
It's interesting. They say as you get more experience in something, the harder it is to answer a question in simple terms. But the non-obvious drivers of growth, the things that matter the most, you would almost consider, I would say that the three things we see most often are going to be this. First off, one, they don't realize the things that actually speak to their customers. They only understand the things they can measure.
Right.
Biggest fallacy of growth.
Right.
And then we know that any KPI that becomes anything that becomes a KPI that you're obviously measuring to, then actually becomes ineffective. It's an old adage.
Right.
Second thing that's a hidden driver of growth.
Because you plan for the KPI, not for the outcome.
Exactly. You lose the plot, as they would say.
Yeah.
This was, when I was a CMO myself, this was one of the things that was the hardest parts. Because every single time that you were evaluating a system of things, you must look at it and be like, okay, did I miss the point? Did I just build a Lego construction to the sky because I thought it was cool? This often gets called empire building within corporations, right? I built an empire that governs nothing. The second thing that I would say is a big driver of growth that we don't often hear about is you can actually reduce friction from the funnel itself.
So everybody unpack what you mean by that.
So everybody talks about being like, we need more leads. We need more people walking in the door. We need all that stuff. But you know what's way cheaper? Making sure the people who walk in the door convert better. People are so focused on net new that they don't think about it. You know, this happened once when we were doing a study, which was we worked with this monstrous retailer that everybody knows that sells drinks. And they were spending mid-8 figures on advertisements and could not lift anything at all. It was driving them batty. So we go in, do this big thing with all our tech, right? And we're like, wow, you're right. We don't see the lift. And so then what we ended up doing was something a little bit different. We brought in all the foot traffic going in. We brought in the digital ordering system. We brought in the mobile app, all of that.
And when you say you brought in, you're talking
like
about
sucking all the data, want to instrument and look at it. What we found was they were actually denial of service attacking their own business. Marketing was hyper successful. They were driving a massive amount in the door. They were driving a massive amount of digital revenue. They were doing all of the orders. Once you walked in the door and you waited in line, all orders were in the exact order they were received. So if somebody did a whole bunch of digital orders for like DoorDash or something, you would have to wait till all of those completed before they would serve you while you stayed in line.
That's
bad idea.
That's a bad idea.
So they drove a huge amount of foot traffic at the same time they drove digital orders, and thus the entire system, nobody wants to wait 30 minutes to do anything.
Yeah.
And they walked straight out the door.
Yeah, interesting.
And so marketing was working. It was a delivery failure.
Right.
But at what point do you say it's marketing or not? That's the hidden drivers of growth.
When you founded the company, there was a series of, I think, convictions. You'll correct me if
Oh, no,
that's not the
definitely
right word.
convictions.
That there were certain problems that marketing had yet to solve for, right? Attribution, to use an easy thing, really wasn't measuring attribution at all. It was measuring a last click, at least metaphorically, and not ignoring, but it was incapable of determining all that went into driving that last click, which is the ultimate measure of attribution, right? Mm-hmm. What were you seeing, and what problems are you guys solving for your clients? And what does a CEO need to know about the problems marketers haven't been able to solve for, even the best ones, that they now can?
So a little bit of background, because I think it's helpful. I started my career doing technical stuff at Ames Research Center, kind of as like a computer science intern almost, right?
And that's NASA's Ames Research.
Ames.
Yeah.
And then after that, after wandering around the universe trying to figure out what I want to do with myself, eventually I became the head of marketing for a company called WP Engine when it was super small and took it through scale. And then I ended up becoming a CMO fixer for private equity. So when they would buy an entire division of Motorola, right, or decide to bring a big brand from Europe to the U.S., I'd be the poor soul sent in to retrofit it for IPO or acquisition, right?
Congratulations and condolences.
Right? And they're like, you get 50% less, go figure it out. And so, I was kind of forged in the fires of PE. And that gives you a very, very different perspective because they have no sense of humor. One of the most visceral memories I have is I get called up by this amazing CFO really, really late at night. And because he was based in Europe and I was in the U.S., it's like 11 o'clock. And he's like, calls me up, Tomás. I'm like, yes. And he's like, you have the highest discretionary spend in the entire company. What do you mean you don't know what it does? I'm like, what do we want me to do, dude? Go to their house and ask, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And like, no amount of data, no amount of stuff, right? Everything else in companies, a large amount of it tends to be deterministic. You just know. You have double keeping accounting. You have a server. You know how many people. You know how many people came in. And marketing goes, all of our data is either we kind of know, right? Or we're using a proxy metric.
Yep.
So the entire rest of the organization has certainty. And marketing has statistics. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One, that's broken. The second thing that's broken is the conversation we're just having, right, about profitability and revenue and all these things. Every great marketer I've ever met, understands that they are a part-time CFO.
Yes.
And you have to be.
Well, to your earlier point, I think the greatest commonality between a CEO's job and a CMO's job, putting aside objective, is the allocation of capital to profitable outcome.
Yep.
Right? And if you do not operate as if your marketing investments were your stock portfolio investments, you're kind of fucked.
Agreed. Oh, can we talk like that?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I'm so excited. It makes life easier. So the way I would say it from this is let's imagine this conversation happens and I'm like, I go on a tirade where I'm like, I'm going to try to measure all things, right? Because I actually do code and I do this stuff. So I built a whole bunch of stuff, did all these things. I still couldn't do it, right?
Why?
Because some of it's literally not physically possible. I'm sponsoring a sports team, right? A really large one. It's a $100 million deal over 7 years. Mm-hmm. That's amortized capital, right? That you're going to do paying a mortgage.
Right.
And all your marketing and analysis is either last touch or correlative to the last 2 weeks.
Right.
But the cost is amortized over 7 years.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Right?
Which one of these things is not like the other?
Right. Or this is actually the reason one of my most controversial opinions is true ROI in marketing for a long time was literally not possible. Because if you think about doing the analysis, what is the fastest you've ever seen a public company close their books? What, a couple weeks, 2, 3, maybe? At the best cases, sometimes it can be a couple months in the quarter. And so if you're amortizing those costs, doing production, and say you book a conference a year in advance and you prepay to get a discount, that cost is recognized in the quarter it's used. Do you know how many marketing teams actually pull across all of those amortized costs in their ROI calcs? It's usually one spreadsheet. Nobody does.
Right.
Never met one.
Right.
If you are my hero, right? Like, seriously.
Raise your hand, audience.
No, seriously. If you have, like, I want to know how you did it, and I would love, you should do a masterclass for, Seth here. But the practicalities of that, you have to understand when a CFO and a CEO think like that, right? They know the whole line costs. So you come back in and there's this second problem, which is the natural doubling. The number of board meetings and consultancies I've been in where I've sat and I've been like, this CMO sitting at the table and goes, yeah, we got $5 million in value from PR. We got $6 million in value from that. The last touch for Instagram was, $3 million. The last touch for TikTok was this. And then the CFO looks over and goes, then why did I sell $2 million in stuff? Mm-hmm. You've seen all these marketing metrics, right?
A different definition of value. It's being ascribed, but
there's only one value of the dollar.
Exactly. They're vanity metrics, and I think a lot of CMOs. I mean, this kind of goes back to the thesis of the show, though. I think a lot of CMOs, for better, well, it's not for better or worse, it's for worse, are forced to present vanity metrics to provide the certainty in the absence that the CFO and CEO demand, not knowing that because they do not understand that that a marketer cannot, at least historically, provide that degree of certainty, because when you are selling anything to a being as complicated and idiosyncratic as a human being, little is certain, and I talk about this all the time, so I hope the audience will forgive me for talking about it yet again, which always brings me back to the CEO and CFO denying their own lived experience. How the shoes on their feet got on their feet, the bags in their hands got in their hands, the cars in their driveways, which is, it's as if they do not understand from their own experience that sometimes you can't, why is that car in your driveway? I don't know. I just, I saw the neighbor, I saw an ad, my dad drove one. That it is a stew. It is like jazz.
I would say this brings us back to a really interesting point that you and I talked about before we rolled camera.
Yeah.
Where there are some companies where I actually would say that is not true, and they actually do a great job.
Great job of
the understanding and thinking in very long timelines and understanding how the world works.
Right. Okay. So for those who were not in the room before we started rolling camera, what we were talking about, Tomás and I, was the difference between privately held, in particular, privately held family-owned companies that they plan for generations, and publicly held companies that are, because of the pressures of the capital markets, planning for the quarter.
Let's think about two of the best in the world, right? Hermes, because we're in Cannes, right? I'm walking by them. Hermes, LVMH. Mm-hmm. Monstrously thoughtful about the brand and how they handle it and what things. What will this be like in 10 years? Am I a arbiter of taste? Right? The monetization of taste and being the leader, it's not just about that. It's about understanding cycles, where things move, how you move entire things. And so, when we talk about products that are inherently commoditized, right? And by commodities, I mean it from not from like this product is no different than anybody else. I mean by like
the perception of it's good enough.
No, economically, like gasoline, commoditized product, choosing between BP and Shell, right? Having a laptop bag is a laptop bag. They're only usually, in my opinion, when I was doing my economics research, I kind of came up with a theory that I was like, look, only three things can separate a commoditized product: brand, service, or price. I guarantee you brand is cheaper than doing service every time. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you're Coca-Cola and you sell a carbonated, sweetened beverage, as a category, right, they're kind of like, there's a lot of similarities between things. All the margin, all the profit comes from brand. And so there are people who do this, right, and who can be very, very thoughtful. But the way that I've always found when I look at a CEO and go, those are your three options. Which would you like? They go, all right, that makes a bit more sense. Right. And so I think we've done a disservice to ourselves as marketers, where we've built very little theory since the 4 Ps.
Yeah.
Right. People don't think about this. They don't actually think about, why do we do this? What is the physics of our universe?
Okay.
And all our material is dated from the 60s and 70s mostly.
What I find interesting about that is it makes me think of John Steele's 1974 paper. Sorry, it wasn't John Steele. Spacing his name. I'll add it to the notes when I get it right. The JWT Planning Guide.
Right.
And it's as relevant today within a few degrees as it was then. Because what he was talking about was human behavior.
Yep.
And how to plan for that. And that's relatively, if not almost completely unchanged, at least the dynamics of it.
Oh, I would disagree.
Go ahead.
Like think about two-sided marketplaces. Two-sided marketplaces roughly existed before, but we couldn't do the transactions fast enough to really build them at scale. So think about like all the ad-supported tooling of, say, any of the delivery apps or any even Uber, who's here, right? They have an ad system. Walmart has an ad system. Everybody's doing
got
that.
an ad system, yeah.
But are you saying that really human behavior didn't change like that?
I'm missing the link between human behavior and business systems.
When we talk about human behavior, I have a 7-year-old. My 7-year-old walks up to TVs and starts to swipe them. Is that different than human behavior?
Maybe behavior. The things that drive human decisions is really what I'm talking about. You're right about behavior.
I'll agree, though.
Behavior adapts as the world changes. Yes. But the things that drive purchase behavior from humans are relatively unchanged. And you're
But you got to be specific about the language, right?
Yeah, it's a very fair
I agree
point.
with you, by the way.
Yeah.
Now we're aligned.
Yeah.
Right.
And I talk about this all the time, which is synonyms are one of the things that kill marketers, which is I say behavior. By the way, your push is right. Like it was a lazy choice of words, but I had the same
laziness here. We're having a great discussion.
No, I'm fairly lazy. But yeah, synonyms kill us because I say creativity and mean X, and you hear me say creativity and interpret Y, which again is the subjectivity that surrounds humanity and us individually and collectively. But let's talk about brand for a second, because I think you and I are completely aligned.
Oh yeah, always
on the power of brand, and it has historically been, to the commentary you were just making, hard to measure the actual value of saying brand doesn't have a place on the P&L typically.
Oh man, I was talking about the Fortune 500 CFO.
We like to say Forbes 500 in this.
Apologies.
I'm kidding.
Forbes 500.
I'm kidding.
No, this is going to see. We get it again.
Yeah.
Definition colloquialism. Let's say top 500 Global 2000. I was talking with an actual CFO from that, and I brought this up being like, I had a proposal for how you would a theoretical proposal for how you'd measure brand as an equity, right? And he looks me dead in the eye and goes, I've always had it as a write-off. I never actually considered it had value. And he is dead serious.
That is the fucking problem.
What the fuck did you say to that, right? You're just like, really?
I mean, going back to my note about, how they deny their own lived experience, he wouldn't drive. I'm assuming it was a male CFO. I think you indicated. It doesn't matter. They wouldn't drive the same car if it had a different lower priced mark on it.
But you have to understand where I want to do, instead of rage against them, I want to understand why they say that.
Yeah, you can't solve it.
So what? Because every CFO I've met that I have personally worked with has a deep-seated belief that, like, in their world, a lack of certainty is fraud. That is how it works for them. If you give an inauthentic metric, if you give something that you cannot sit there and be as true, you are committing fraud. And so you walk into their office with those things, and naturally, their training, who they are is when somebody, you ever have like a used car salesman or somebody try to really work the numbers on you, and you're like, you feel it in your bones, they're trained to that times 10,000.
Yeah.
And so when you walk in and you pitch it like that, you use vanity metrics. They go, I've seen CFOs be like, you came into my office lying.
It's such an interesting and important choice of words, back to the importance of words, because their context is fraud.
But we're marketers.
Yeah.
We're supposed to understand the people we talk to. Why do we not do that with CFOs?
Well, that comes up over and over again, and on this show and in my conversations.
So what do you think the value of brand is? If you had to build an equation and put $1 on it.
Oh, please don't ask me to build an equation around anything. I haven't. No, that's
Give
not
me a
my
simile.
game. Well, I'll give you an adjective, which is extraordinary. I think. I mean, goes back to what you said. You know, the CEO has three choices. I don't think there's anything more important than brand. Right? It is the great differentiator, decommoditizer, driver of performance.
Decommoditization. Walking into a CFO's office and saying the words, "Brand decommoditize the product and protects gross margin."
Yes,
that is a phrase
that's the
marketer
language.
should say.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Again, we seem to be in violent disagreement, except
violent agreement, my friend.
Violent agreement, except for that one place where we disagreed. But there's been a word implicit in a bunch of what we've been talking about that I want to make explicit, which is emotion. You know, because we are emotional beings who typically make, if not almost always, make emotional decisions subconsciously and then rationalize them, right? When we buy that Tiffany blue box that you referred to, it's because of our emotional...
Hermes orange.
The Hermes orange. Or a toothpaste, there's typically an emotional connection. When we buy the lowest price good, it's not because it's the lowest price good. It's because it makes us feel thrifty, like we saved money. Money is emotional itself, very emotional.
Of course.
So
number one reason for divorce, as I recall.
From personal experience?
No, I'm saying in general, this is like a fact, right?
Yeah.
Like that clearly means it matters to people.
Yeah, yes, it matters to people, putting aside that it's very hard to stay married for a long time from personal experience. But I digress. Have you figured out, are you in the process of figuring out how to measure and attribute to/for emotion?
The answer I would say is no one can perfectly attribute emotion, but I do know how to actually value a brand.
Go on.
And so this is a proposal that, it's funny. I had a long conversation with one of the brilliant partners at E&Y. What does E&Y do, right? Finance auditing is their core key.
EY.
Yeah, they do a bunch of stuff, right? And the reason I was talking to all those CFOs is I was attempting to be like, can I build an equation to talk about this that can separate out into language they understand, non-emotional language, right? Because again, emotional language to that group is never going to work, right? Can I separate that out? And so here was kind of my proposal. You brought up toothpaste. I remember, so I did a 2-year stint in Bollywood at one point of random things in my life. And I remember I flew to India and ended up there and I forgot my toothpaste. And I don't read any Hindi. And so I go into the store to try to find one. And there's only one logo I recognize. What toothpaste did I buy?
The logo you recognized.
So my entire premise is brand is a function of the cost of cash. Now,
explain that for me.
Yeah, so it's friction reduction.
Yes, I love that.
So what brand is, it is the greatest friction reducer on the face of the earth. How you do this monetarily is actually really interesting. We have a whole instrumentation behind this, but the way you would think about it is this, is you would say, okay, say I have a 12-month sales cycle, B2B company, right? Suddenly, because my brand is so good, you get your own adage, like nobody gets fired for buying IBM, right? Remember that thing?
I reference that 1974 ad all the time. First of all, it's one of my favorite pieces of work, but it's one of my favorite pieces of work for exactly what we're talking about, because it spoke to the emotion of being afraid to make a decision. And while that was measured probably at the time in millions, tens of millions, and not billions of dollars, whether it's billions of dollars or your deodorant, you're afraid of failure.
And that failure has a cost in time,
yeah,
and also cost in capital.
Yeah.
So suddenly, because of that, your sales cycle goes from 12 months to 6 months, right?
Wait, I'm sorry, I missed.
So we have a 12-month sales cycle.
Oh, the friction reduce.
Right. Suddenly you do that ad, you make it, you get your own adage, right? Everybody's stuck with it, and now your sales cycle is 6 months.
Yeah.
The value of brand is the time it takes to run the entire business between the time it would have been 6 months and 12 months.
Really interesting.
That friction has a cost.
Yeah.
A really, really expensive cost.
And the absence of friction has a value.
And the absence of friction has value.
Yeah.
So you can actually put a real number on it. And this is one of the things where we're actually I'm like, could we build this into an actual, true metric? And that's what we've been discussing. But, most of the CFOs I've talked to have been like, that is an equation. To him, when you tell it to a CFO, they're like, that is a thing that I can look at, is a system that works across multiple stuff. Now, I've added one more thing to this. It's a function of friction and volume, in my opinion, as well. I add the volume component after we did some research, because it can not only reduce friction, but it can also increase volumes.
You're talking about sales volumes.
Yeah. Or any type of volumes of things, right? Volumes of actions. You might not have sales. You might be doing, like, you might be a streaming service doing tune-in, right? How do I get viewers?
Right.
So,
Do you think, this is a bit of a digression, but do you think in the context of a streamer, tune-in is kind of the sale? Do you think that's a fair note?
We've been blessed enough to work with a few of the streamers now. Actually, no, this I can talk about because we just did the panel yesterday. Sorry, I usually have to be very tight-lipped about these things.
Yep.
I have to do generals. So no, we did a panel yesterday with
for our listeners who are going to come into this at some other point. We're recording in Cannes at the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity, and the panel Tomás is referring to happened here the other day.
Yeah, and it was Rita Farrow, the president of advertising for Disney, and Gulen, the global CMO of Mars, who I've been blessed to work with both. They're brilliant. And so when I was, when we were originally very, very first started even discussing things, I got to hear a lot of things from Disney about like how streaming works, and we have other streaming customers as well. There's a few things to note, and I'll just throw some things out there as metrics that people might think about. It's not just viewers being the thing. It's also what thing causes somebody to sign up for a service.
Yep.
That compelling moment. What's the first thing they watch? The first time we really saw this was like Game of Thrones, remember?
Yep.
Everybody's like, all right, fine, I have to buy HBO now, right?
Yeah, it was like House of Cards on Netflix.
House of Cards was originally that on Netflix. And then, for me, it was Paw Patrol on Paramount Plus with a 7-year-old. There was no avoiding Paw Patrol. There was not chasing my life. There was sadness.
Yeah.
But like you have those compelling moments. That by itself, if you just talk about tuning, you can have really high volumes of stuff that people find. But it might not be the initiating event.
Will you define compelling moments and initiating event?
Compelling moments are, so again, what I'm going to try to do is, just like I talked about brand, is I want to put this in a concept that if you set it to a CFO or CMO, which is our audience here, they're going to understand it. CFO, CMO, CEO. All right. So the way you think about it is there's some great neuro research done a while back. And what it said is, when I need coffee in the morning, getting myself to the awake state is actually kind of hard sometimes.
As I am finding today in particular.
Right, especially after, it is Cannes. So.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is it actually takes more energy to change state than it does to actually sustain that state.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What is a compelling moment? A compelling moment is something with enough energy that it can change the state.
I fucking love that.
Right? That means it takes more energy. You can't just do like a standard blah thing, right? You actually have to rise above it, right?
Yeah.
But to achieve a state change, to materially move a business, you have to have a compelling moment with enough energy to change the state of that business. And there's equations around this that you can do. This is a lot of what we do is we're an applied science company, right? Like I build these equations, I give them to CMOs. CMOs can now suddenly communicate with their exec office.
Yeah, which to me, by the way, is less about applied science than contextualizing, and you come to that contextualization through an applied science lens. But what's also interesting, I really love what you said. I hope my notes reflect it, which, you need
I'll send you the
enough.
study.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
I won't understand it, but I'd love to see it.
No, you'll throw it into ChatGPT and have it tell you.
Okay, I can do that. Enough energy that it can change the state, which is as true for, at the global, which is at the global enterprise level, company transformations fail so often, right? They work, they spend however much time and however much money putting in place the transformation plan, and then there isn't enough energy to make the transformation plan a transformation reality.
But for a CFO, they're going to be like, what's the minimum amount I can do this with? That's how a CFO should think, right?
Right, yes.
But what marketers aren't saying is, by the way, the minimum amount is there has to be enough energy to change state, not just to sustain the state.
Yeah,
so what marketers do is they pitch to a CFO. CFO goes, you only need enough money to hold that new state. But there's actually way more investment done on the front side to change to that state.
Yeah.
And we don't do the delta.
Yeah.
It's our own fault.
Yeah.
Right?
Really interesting.
And so like this is where I said about the theory of marketing and everything, like we need to have these discussions.
So one of the old school theories of marketing was based on the funnel, and the funnel was linear, and it went from
worst thing that ever happened in marketing was the customer journey.
I'm curious as to why you think that, but give me a second just to get there, which is, the old school model was a linear reality: awareness, familiarity, consideration, trial, purchase, repeat purchase, perhaps. Today, there is no such thing as nothing is linear. The customer journey, and I'll let you in just a sec explain why you don't like that phrase, but the journey from awareness or unawareness, is unawareness a word? Not being aware, to becoming a customer.
Things I hate about you, where it's like, if you can be overwhelmed and you could be underwhelmed, can you be just whelmed?
Yeah.
I think you can in Europe. Wait, we're in Europe.
I'm very whelmed. Looks like, tangled iPad, the old iPod headphone wires. How does a CMO within that tangled mess where you don't know if that initiating event comes from what or where in a world where we see there are so many inputs to our decisions? How do you figure out the attribution model? And actually, you mentioned Gulen, and it's Gulen Benji, who's the CMO at Mars, who said something just yesterday on your panel. She said, when you can find attribution to any investment, there's really no barrier to making investments, which I just loved. How do you find attribution to any investment given that those tangled wires?
The original inspiration for our company came from two places. The first was one of the people that convinced me to start it, which was a company called Renaissance Technologies, which is out in New York. They were the first high-frequency trading firm ever. Like, hey, could I look at the weather in Paris and guess the stock price in New York type stuff? The second was a lot of the mathematics that came around during COVID.
I mean, I don't even understand that equation. I mean, it's just such brilliance. Like, would never ever.
I mean, the guy who founded Renaissance Technologies is considered one of the greatest mathematicians to have ever lived. He's very quiet. He said something that actually, just because of the audience for the show, we'll talk about, where he's like, look, we have things called edges. So when you're dealing with what's called a graph, like a social graph, right? Think like I'm connected to my friends. The connection between 2 points is called an edge. But this guy said, all edges have a capacity of which you cannot exceed. So what he's talking about with this is like, if you find something in the market and it's like your secret, if you get good enough at it, someone will be able to track it, everybody will jump in, and your advantage for that edge in the market will disappear. Right? So all edges have capacity. Marketing is the same way. One of the old adages I used to always tell my staff is, the more mature the channel, the less likely you are to have cheap wins.
Yeah.
Right? So like as that capacity fills. So when we kind of talked through this, the math from COVID was, I woke up one morning and I was like, you remember contact tracing? Like follow everyone?
Yep.
I was like, what is the difference between a contact trace and a marketing touch mathematically?
Oh, interesting.
Nothing. So
was that literally the inspiration?
Well, yeah, that was literally, it was like a shower thought, right? And there was a lot of incredible mathematics being done at the time where they were literally using supercomputers. They'd taken over like some of the nuclear computers and stuff to actually model this stuff. And I'm like, so if nuclear, weather, disease, drug discovery, if everybody else can do this, why, when we spend $1 trillion a year on brand marketing in the world, do we all use math from the 1970s, right? Now, at the time, I remember this call with my board, and we were trying to even get compute to test this, and we couldn't. And NVIDIA and Jensen, the team over there, have been very good to us over the years. And I remember calling, they were one of our first customers, actually, was NVIDIA. And we called them up and we're like, hey, I want to try this crazy thing, but I can't get computing power. Like, we run one of the couple hundred fastest supercomputers on the planet to do this.
Okay.
And not like one giant machine.
Right.
We keep it in Northern Virginia, where the 3-letter agencies are, right? It's ours. You have to understand, a marketing company calling up their board and be like, you know what, I would like to buy a supercomputer, please. Real credit to Justin Wexler and Katzenberg that they did not throw me out of the room at that point.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yes, I would like a supercomputer, and I'm going to pivot the entire company to do causal mathematics that are based off of biotechnology. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And to their credit, after enough explaining and doing, we went with it. And we knew, and by the way, Jensen's kind of like a weird, I don't talk to him now, but weird patron saint for our company. He saved our company's life like twice. And so one of them was gain us this compute because you just couldn't get it, right? So what happens when you bring that methodology? This is the stuff actually we did with Gwyn. What happens when you bring that methodology, that level of intelligence, and you bring it down to marketing? Well, one, we can do things we've never done ever before. Two, when you can do
like
things...
What?
Remember how I mentioned that use case where we're like $100 million over 7 years for sports? Mm-hmm. We can find out the value down to the dollar.
In what time
frame? How much
frame?
revenue? Yeah, over any time frame. As long as the data stream has current data.
Okay, so let's use that as an example. Like, break that down. How can you find down to the dollar the value of a 7-year sponsorship in any time frame? Like, what are you actually considering?
Well, let's do a simple one because we did. We spoke at the GTC conference, which is NVIDIA's giant developer conference, the highly technical one, and I did a panel with Alicia Tillman, who's one of my favorite CMOs.
Great CMO from Delta.
Yeah, and she was SAP before that and came from a private equity background. And so they were doing the Olympics. And there's a couple of problems with the Olympics. One is, how many times have you been in your career and somebody's looked at you and be like, we don't have enough historical data to know that or predict that. It's like one of the most common things any executive hears. So the Olympics are a really expensive event that's held every 2 years for a couple weeks. So if you have daily data, that means you have 14 time steps. That's it. So how do you actually know across those, right, whether it did anything at all? Now, normally you'd be waiting for a big MMM study, right, or something else later. Mm-hmm. What we do is we take in every single data source that we can possibly get our hands on, billions and billions of rows of time series. We once brought in 100 billion transactions in 2 days. You know what I mean? Once we bring that stuff in, we can then see what actually changes. Now, one of the problems that we had to solve that was almost impossible is that you have two major problems that why marketing has never been able to do this before. Problem number one, how do you compare apples and oranges? What I mean by that is, like, say, take a Nielsen rating. Nielsen rating is a survey, right, of the population. How is it that the same as a person pressing a button on a mobile app? How is that the same as somebody walking in a store? Different mediums, different modalities. How do you normalize that? The second thing is the lack of history. How do you actually decide what actually changes? So we had to build...
How do you decide what actually changes, or how do you decide,
how do you
determine what caused the change?
Yeah, both, right? Okay. How do you even detect it? Because there's not enough historical data. Okay. And how do you even decide?
Right.
So to do this, we actually had to build what's called a spiking neural network. And it's a digital twin of the human brain, and it's a Gen 3 neural network. You know, transformers are much earlier than that.
So you've created a digital twin of the human brain.
Yep.
Okay.
And an AI. And what humans can do is we can pattern match from the moment we're born. You don't have to teach us. Mm-hmm. So we actually can look at the shape of data, how it reacts. That lets us do the short time history. The other thing is spiking neural networks encode everything into neuron spikes. So like our brain, I touch this table, I look at you, they're both coming into the same system as, you know, neurons spiking throughout other systems. So it changes it into that.
I sense yours spike higher than mine, but...
I don't know. But the way that you can kind of think about this is that lets us normalize the data and also detect short time periods. But we had to literally build things that had only been done in the most advanced AI labs to be able to accomplish this.
Okay, let's keep talking about Delta and the Olympics.
So now we can detect it.
Well, let me ask. Let me try and finite the question, which is: you bring in a bazillion data points. Mm-hmm. You have 14 timestamps. How the hell do you figure out that their partnership
when we have
was
many
causal?
years of data,
right,
that we can pull in?
Yeah.
And what we do is we can mine for chain reactions. So the way that this works is it's like
an EKG.
It's actually drug discovery. So you know how they talk about we can do automated drug discovery now? What you do is you might have like carbon, sodium, nitrogen has a likely treatment effect on a disease.
I did not know that, but okay.
But it's like, think about it, like it's, you model it, you go, hey, this has a good chance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're like, well, TV, right, plus podcasts with that Google ad equals sale.
Right. So
chain reaction.
So you're measuring the chain reaction and or the individual elements contribution to, saying back to your notion of energy.
Both. So first we look at things like energy, signal processing, everything that lets us link things together. This is linked to this. The carbon is linked to the sodium, right? Mm-hmm. The second thing that we do is we then mine all the chain reactions that exist, all the levers and chain reactions that exist in the business. The thing is, people don't even know. Now, we do this with all anonymous aggregate data. No PII, no cookies, everything. But this is the same as talking about we have a whole bunch of anonymous people in a medical study in COVID, right? Like this math is fairly well known. And so what happens then when we do that is if I see this chain reaction occurs every time, suddenly a whole bunch of brand new chain reactions that have never existed occur. Then what are the things that changed in the system? The only thing that massively changed in the system at that time was the Olympics. Now, the most fascinating thing about this study actually was they were running a ton of 30-second and 60-second, et cetera, spots, right? Large volume. The thing that actually had the highest ROI was when they did that, NBC gave Delta the medal ceremony. You ever watch? Did you watch the Olympics at all in the U.S.?
I did not.
So if you did, you would see like every medal ceremony was the Delta medal presentation. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out when you have a really emotional moment with a gold medal with the Eiffel Tower in the background, you sell a lot of tickets to Paris. Mm-hmm. That was the most
back to measuring for emotion.
But you can actually measure it. We're like, we see that new chain reaction based off that emotional moment. The most profitable thing was actually the in-program. Now, it was obviously supported by the spots and everything else. They wouldn't even have gotten that if they hadn't ordered enough spots. But that's the type of fascinating things you can look at.
So I want to invert the question a little bit, because in the Delta example, what we've been measuring is the return on dollars already spent. Mm-hmm. What about from a predictive and forecast perspective? How can which is one of the greatest problems any marketer has, because they're trying to figure out where to spend the next dollar for maximum return. How has technology advanced, in particular yours, I suspect, to provide me greater line of sight and confidence, if not certainty, that the next dollar will yield a greater return than it might otherwise have?
You know, it's interesting. When we talk about, one of the hardest things for a marketer is oftentimes they confuse measurement with intelligence.
Yes.
And so when we talk about how we look at that, the way we tackle it is a little bit different. So we model the whole universe of marketing, right? We see every single little chain reaction, all that. So say we know the last 180 days. Then what we do is we simulate if that universe was still in motion for the next set of days. And then what we do is we go in, and this is, I kid you not, it's the hardest thing to describe sometimes because it's literally, remember the Marvel movies with like Thanos and Doctor Strange and everything? Mm-hmm. And, Doctor Strange goes, I looked at 1 million universes and this is the only one in which we won, right? We literally permutate the universe artificially. Literally, the past. Yeah. We change the past in every single way we can think of, and then we project out what will happen in the future.
Okay, let's spend a second on that because that's fascinating. So make it tactical. You change the past.
So if you had done more of this, less of this, all these things, right? Change what you actually did. Artificially change all that data across billions of little permutations, and then we find the best possible universe for you.
Is there a moment where I remember I was with a client years and years ago who said to me, brilliant marketer, one of the world's largest, most revered brands. He said, we know that every time we run television ads, this is 20 years ago, we're going to see an increase in sales. And so I said to him, so why don't you run more television ads? And he kind of looked at me like, don't ask me that question. Is there I didn't understand it. If like every time you spend $1, you're going to get $1.10 back, why not spend more dollars? Is there a point at which the investment ceases to be accretive?
But remember...
A good investment.
Yeah, but remember what Gulen said, right? That you could. Mm-hmm. People will find money. The problem is that, again, remember how we talked about margin and unit price and everything else? Marketers are coming in being like, I have a correlation that when I run TV, everything. But then the CFO looks and goes, well, how do you know it was marketing and not the market?
Yes.
Do you actually know?
Are you measuring for incrementality?
No, I mean, that's not even incrementality. Like incrementality is still correlative, right?
But isn't marketing in the market versus marketing equation you just put out the incremental?
A little more complex than that, right? Because what you're doing is you're doing a lot of incremental stuff is based off a type of math called linear regression, right? Where you're just projecting out. That cannot see individual events and the time between those events mathematically. So what we do is we look at individual events. It's a lot different than standardized incrementality. It's neuroscience, basically. Now, incrementality is a wonderful way of measuring, right? It's probably the better one out of the ones we currently have available to most standard kits, like standard toolkits. But the way you would think about this is remember those edges I said? They all have capacity?
Yeah.
You want to invest up to capacity. When you go past capacity, you lower it back down, right? The problem is marketers can't prove that capacity, but let's take tariffs. Okay. Sales are down. Is it marketing's fault or is it the tariff? What's counterfactual?
Well, probably could be both, but I take your point.
But that's why you can't get money is because you have to be able to prove that was marketing. Yeah. But us saying we don't know, right?
Back to your QSR example.
If you say we don't know, we want to do this anyway, you're like, you want to hold up $50 million on the P&L line off a guess? Mm-hmm. Who's going to do that?
Yeah. I spent some time with the folks from McKinsey who just put out their CEO CMO survey. And if I remember the second year of it, there was a data point that said 80% of CMOs and CEOs agree that marketing is underfunded. There was another data point that said 20% of CEOs don't understand what their marketing organization does to drive growth. And what I asked them was, I was like, can you take a look at the data and see if the 20% who don't understand what the fuck marketing does have been removed, and the 80% of CEOs who think marketing is underfunded are therefore the 80% who do understand what marketing does, and therefore they understand, believe, at least implicitly, that marketing is a driver of sustainable, profitable growth. Because if it's underfunded, it goes back to the premise of the show, which is you're just punching growth in the face.
Have you ever bought a house?
I have. I'm selling two right now if you'd like to buy.
No. I like my little broken down check in SF. But when you're buying a house, right, there's all these requirements that you can't violate.
Yep.
And if there's even one little deviation, you have to write an entire story about all the things. And that's like $500,000, $1.5 million purchase. When you're asking for $50 to $100 million of the P&L.
Or more, yeah.
Right? Some of our marketers have $1.6 billion budgets. Wasn't that the contract assigned to Publicis for Mars?
I don't know what that was.
It was just awarded, right? $1.6 billion. When you're assigning that much cash, you don't get to guess.
No.
And so that whole conversation
the whole system has been, in fact, built on that guess historically, right? And
but this is where I say the theory. This is our own fault.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Well, I think, doesn't technology make available? I mean, could we have done this 10 years ago?
No, absolutely
not. There we go. So, we work with the tools we have.
We could communicate better.
Of that, there is no doubt. No doubt whatsoever. I say it all the time, which is, you got to manage, set and manage expectations.
The entire purpose of my company is to turn marketers into storytellers again. That is the only mandate.
Amen.
Every single thing I built is built off of that.
And it's the first rule of comedy, know your audience. Which is the first rule of marketing.
But also I sat in the chair, right?
Yeah.
That's all I ever wanted. The funny thing is I'm good at it, but I don't love doing math. I love solving problems.
Yeah.
And I actually got out of mathematics and went into music because to me they were very similar.
Yes.
Right? Because I didn't love doing math all the time. For me, I'm so passionate about the problem that I will sit down and code GPU kernels and stay up till 3 a.m. dealing with, open source libraries, right?
Well, I'm going to say that's something I've never done and likely never will, but I
wouldn't recommend it.
We've got 5 minutes, and I want to ask you a series of questions that we try and weave into every episode. They're like fill in the blank super fast. Marketing is
growth.
A brand is
story.
Sources of strategic advantage are
intelligence.
The hardest part of being a CMO is
everybody thinks they're a marketer.
Preach. The hardest part of being a CEO is
external expectations.
By the way, you're doing a great job with the quick answers. The biggest tensions between a CMO and their C-suite colleagues are
using vanity metrics instead of reality.
Last one. Brands and businesses grow when?
Through invention.
Tomás Puig, CEO and founder of Alembic. Thank you so much for being with us. I found this absolutely fascinating.
I love this conversation. Anytime.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And to our listeners,
Can
thanks.
we have drinks next time?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I was too sober for this conversation.
To our listeners, thanks again for tuning into Forbes, the CEO's Guide to Marketing. I am Seth Matlins. If you like the show, smash the subscribe button. By the way, I say this at the end of every show. I want you to know I'm paying homage to my kids who used to say that about their Instagram accounts when they were too young to have Instagram accounts. So, hi guys, smash that subscribe button, give it a rating, and if you can, leave a review, because that's how others will find it. If you found it useful, maybe they will be too. Thank you. See you next time.